Hey guys, it's Kat and I'm back today finally to do my 1 month, one brand video that I have been talking about for a little bit of time now, and this has actually taken me nearly 2 months to complete. Yeah, it's taken me a while. So if you are new here and you've never seen one of these videos, this is a different version to what I normally do. So normally my 1 month, one palette series, I choose a palette to focus on for a month. I use it predominantly throughout the whole month, and then I check back in to let you know how I went throughout the month and some looks that I created. This one I decided to do a brand because I picked up quite a few Coloured Raine palettes in a short period of time. So this is sort of like the Coloured Raine eyeshadow palette month. This month did take a lot longer. It was supposed to happen in just September, but there was a few hiccups in September. So like, for example, I did the Sigma palette review, which took up a whole week. I was sick for a little while. I didn't wear much makeup. So I carried this throughout October until like mid-October until I got enough looks that I was sort of happy with. So I haven't used all shades in all palettes, but it is what it is. Now I know the 1 month, one palette series, a lot of people love it and it's their favorite series that I do. I am going to give an update on what's happening with that series. If you don't care, and this is the first time you're watching this, you want to just get to the looks, I'll leave a timestamp on the screen so you can skip this. But if you are sort of interested in knowing where the series has gone and what's happening with it, I'll explain. So pretty much last year, I started the 1 month, one palette series because I was doing a low buy. So it was sort of an incentive to use the makeup that I already own, give love to the makeup that I own and has sort of forgotten about, and then I want to try again. And it was a really fun sort of challenge to me because I wasn't buying new makeup, and it was just a way that I can, create content and still find something enjoyable about makeup I already own. Now, I sort of carried it through halfway through this year, and I just found that more and more I lost my interest in it, partly because I am buying things now, so I'm not on a low buy. So I just got really sick of having to challenge myself. I think 18 or 17 months of it, the challenge became no longer fun, it became a chore. So, and I sort of had used all the palettes that I was interested in revisiting. So I sort of tried to keep the series up, but it just became really forced and really boring, to the point where I actually had attempted a couple of 1 month, one palette videos, and by like the second week, I kept forgetting to take photos of the looks, I kept forgetting to use the palette, and I just lost interest. So I like this video series, but I think for me, it's sort of run its course. I might bring it back down the track when I do want to revisit palettes that I already own. But the challenge just became monotonous, if that makes sense. So what I actually found that I much prefer to do is like more the week reviews, where I do a first impressions, trying a palette, and then I check back in with looks. I find that's a little bit more fun. It's a little bit more organic. It's a little bit more contained. And it's just easier to create those videos maybe once a month without the pressure of having to wear makeup most days, or, force yourself to use a certain type of makeup most days in a month. I just found that it became really tiring. So what I might do from now on is rename my sort of like first impressions over 7-day kind of videos into a 1 week, one palette video. And I might channel this sort of video idea into the weekly ones, because I just find when I do it for a week, I'm more excited, I'm more passionate about it. I try to create sort of more interesting looks. When I was doing this video, I just found I did so many boring looks, and I was like, why am I even taking photos of this? It's boring. So I just sort of, lost the interest in it. I think a week testing a palette, like I can still get the versatility in the palette that I would get over the whole month. You just miss out on all the like mundane, boring things in between. And I also feel like I'm just more excited and more interested in that particular palette than when I have to stretch it over a week. So yeah, this series isn't going to be continuing right now. Like I said, I might pick it up down the track, but it is kind of being morphed into the 1 week, one palette series. Anyway, I hope that makes sense. It's just really hard to create like month-long content when you're not that interested in it. It just becomes a real chore. All right, on to today's video. So what I ended up doing was creating a total of 26 looks that I took photos of. I think there are a couple more that I forgot to take photos of, but it's on Coloured Raine. So I have 3 larger Coloured Raine eyeshadow palettes. I've got the Safari Raine, I've got the Queen of Hearts, and Cheers to the Beauty palette. So with the Safari Raine video, I actually ended up doing a first impressions over a week video where I use this a lot more than I did in this video. So if you're more interested in this palette, I will link that down below because I didn't use this a hell of a lot in this video. The one I used the most was the Queen of Hearts. This one is grubby, you can see I used it a lot, and it's more of a sort of neutral palette. It's got some cool tones, some warm tones, some purple tones, browns. That is the one that I wore mostly. Cheers to the Beauty looks like this. So it is a big sort of colorful palette. It's got more sort of warm toned colors here, some cool toned shimmers there. And then I also tried to use these mini palettes. So I have the Lovelies, the Berry Cute, the Smoke Show, and the Beauty Rust. So these ones I tried to incorporate as well. I just didn't use every shade in all of them, but I did at least try to use them a couple of times. That's the Lovelies, the Berry Cute, Smoke Show, and the Beauty Rust. So I'll talk about all of these and what I think about them overall at the end, but I'm gonna run through the looks I created starting from look number 1 all the way to the look I'm wearing today. And you are gonna see that there's some days where I wear, you know, more makeup, generally filming days, and there's gonna be days where I wear really, really bland makeup, but you know, that's why these get boring. All right, so for look number 1, which will be on the screen, I used the Cheers to the Beauty palette and I used 2 shades in there, which was Rosé and Iconic. So Rosé is a very, very yellow toned gold and Iconic is a very, very gray toned taupe. In the crease, I actually used a Huda Beauty neon pink sort of eyeshadow. So it's a matte from that palette. So you can't get that sort of bright pink in these palettes, but that's what I wore. Look number 2, I used the Lovelies palette. So this is one of the smaller palettes. And I used the shades High Cutie, Daydreaming, and Misty Nights. So these are sort of like the neutral shades. Like there's 2 pinky shades, like pinky sort of mauvey shades, 1 shimmer, 1 matte, and 1 sort of cement gray color. So that's a pretty basic look. So in look number 3, I used the Queen of Hearts palette. I started with the shade Air, just in the crease. That's just like a nude flesh tone color for me. I used the shade Royal Prerogative, which is sort of like a crease color brown. And Your Majesty, which is, it looks quite gold on the eye. It's not as yellow as the rosé from the Cheers to the Beauty, but it is more of a sort of bronzy gold. Now I use that kind of combination multiple times. In fact, I'm using some of those shades today. So that was a really common one for me. And even if I didn't have repeated photos of this, which I might have, I actually did use this combination quite a lot. Look number 4, I also used the Queen of Hearts palette, but I used more cool tone shades from it. So I used the shade Princess, which is more of a mauvey crease color. I used Royal Highness, which is more of a traditional taupe shade. And just to deepen up the look a little bit, I used the dark shimmery brown called Dethrone. And that's another sort of go-to look that I created quite often from this palette. So I either went quite warm or quite cool. All right, the next look is pretty basic and pretty fugly. So this is the type of look that I would create on days where I actually wasn't wearing much makeup, but I felt forced to use makeup because I was doing this series. And I used the Queen of Hearts palette, but I just used that Princess shade just all over. All right, look number 6, I clearly thought to myself, you're using the Queen of Hearts palette too much, let's try something else. So I used the Smoke Show palette, which was a mini palette. Now from this palette, I used the shade Naked Eye, which is like a peachy matte flesh color. I used that all over the lid. And then I blended that out with Flammable, which is a warm toned brown. And I also used Showtime, which is a forest green. So all these are matte that I used. Look number 7, I wanted to bring back the greens. Like I do love a green eye. I have been going quite nude lately, but green I really do enjoy. So I wanted to tap into that for at least one look. So I used 2 palettes. I used the Safari Raine palette and the Smoke Show palette. And from Safari Raine, I used the Congo Basin shade, which is a matte sort of olive green. I used Green Valley, which is a shimmery sort of olive green. And I also used Lioness, which is the light shimmery gold on the inner corner. And then from Smoke Show, I used Cloudy to help blend that out. So that's just a light flesh color matte shade. And I used Showtime, which is that dark matte green again. And I did really like that look. I do think I can achieve it probably without the Smoke Show palette, but I just wanted to sort of use as many as possible. All right, the next look is a bit of an interesting one. It looks a bit over the top for the rest of my makeup, but I used the Cheers to the Beauty palette. So in this one, I used Nightingale, which is like an antique bronzy gold shade. It's a shimmery shade. Then I used Powder Room, which is like a peachy toned sort of flesh shade, and Vintage Feels, which is an orange. So I just want to try some more sort of nude shades from that palette because Cheers to the Beauty palette, it's a nice quality palette, but there's a lot of color in there. So I wanted to see if I could sort of use it on a daily basis, and that's what I came up with. The next look doesn't look very good, but I really wanted to use the Berry Cute palette because I did want to use these mini palettes at least once or twice in the month. So I went for the sort of pinky purple look. So what I did was I used Pinkleberry all over the lid, which it looks sort of matte all over the lid in these photos because it just didn't really apply very well. And I will talk about the quality of these and what I thought at the end. Then I used Kissberry, which is sort of, I don't know, a sort of terracotta orange matte in the crease. And I also used Pommyberry, which is a dark purple shimmer, and Loveberry, which is like a dark sort of smoky grey purple matte on the lower lash line. So yeah, that one is like a mix of warm toned and purples, and I don't really like it, but it's the sort of kind of color story you get from that Berry Cute palette. The next look, I forgot to take a photo of it during the day. So this is a really potato photo that I took at night next to a lamp. But this actually turned out all right. It just didn't look good in this lighting. So what I used the Cheers to the Beauty palette. I used the shade Nightingale, which is a sort of old gold bronze color. I used Razor Glass, which is more of that mauve transition color. I used Vintage Feels, which is the sort of orange matte color, and Rosé, which is the gold. The next look is sort of like, once again, a sort of no makeup day look. I used Cheers to the Beauty, and I just used two matte shades. I used Powder Room and Vintage Feels. So sort of like a nude and an orange, and I just sort of diffused that out to make a bit of a grungy orange sort of smoky eye feel. This actually looked a lot more flattering in person than it does in the photos, so I didn't hate the look. It is sort of like a standard, if I was not wearing much makeup, that's the kind of look that I'd create. The next look was atrocious, and I think this is a combination of the application. I think it's a combination of the liner I chose, which was a shimmery brown liner, and it just didn't go with the look. So for this look, I mainly wanted to use the Beauty Rust palette. I want to use the mustard shade, which is Daisy. So this is a mustard matte. I love these colors just all over the lid, but for some reason it just didn't sit very well that day, or this tone didn't really work for me. So I also used the shade Dream, which is the shimmery shade in the palette. It's more of, I don't know what we would call it, an orangey sort of gold shimmer shade. I used that all over the lid, and it had heaps of fallout. It did not stick very well. It ruined the look even further. But I also used the shade Recharge, sort of like the dark muted orange matte, to try to save that, but nothing could save that look. It was not a good look. The next look is a little bit more metallic, looks a bit better than the look before. But for this one, I used Safari Rain. So I was like, I'm not giving Safari Rain enough love. I really do love this palette. And from this, I used Lioness, which is that light, really, really metallic gold shade. I use the shade Clay, which is more of your transition orangey matte brown color. And I used Toucan, which is the more rich yellow gold in that. So after playing with different palettes for a while, I'm like, I want the Queen of Hearts again. So the next few looks, I used the Queen of Hearts. So look number 14, I used the shade Princess, Royal Highness, and Ladyship. And again, this is a typical sort of cool tone look that I would create using this palette, but I did add in a little bit of purple, that purple matte shade with Ladyship. The next look is very, very nude, and this is sort of like a typical go-to look that I would use when I don't want to put too much effort into my makeup. I'm not trying new things. I don't want to play with color. So this is a sort of good indication of what I want to be wearing instead of trying different things every day. But in this one, I used Air, Royal Prerogative, and Crown. So Air is just the matte sort of flesh tone color. Royal Prerogative is the sort of crease, typical brown shade. And Crown is the light highlighter shade. I didn't actually use this shade too much, but you can definitely see it on the inner corner to add a bit of like brightness. And otherwise that was a matte look. The next look I used Princess and Royal Prerogative. So again, two mattes. One is more the mauvey one and one is more the traditional, you know, sort of crease brown shade. But I sort of vamped this up a little bit with some red and maroon eyeliner. Then after a few days of nudes, I was just like, I've got to move on to other palettes. So I went back to Smoke Show, but I did mix this with the Queen of Hearts palette. So from Smoke Show, I used Cloud, I used Torch, and I used Flammable. So mainly, you know, nudes and browns. And I used Your Majesty from the Queen of Hearts. So that is just that sort of bronzy gold color again. But with this one, you can tell I went a little bit more heavy-handed with the lashes. I've got some false lashes on. And this is a really typical look for me if I want to be going out and putting a little bit more effort in, but I don't want too much emphasis on color. This is a really, really typical look that I would create. This one's a little bit more fun. So we decided to go back into color again. So what I used here was a Safari Rain palette. I used Congo Basin, Green Valley, Jungle, Lioness, and a few mattes from the Queen of Hearts palette. So the main difference between this one and the last green one that I showed was that I used Jungle, which was that sort of teal color, the matte teal, and I also paired it with a teal liner. So it was green, so those olive grassy greens, as well as a bit of teal thrown in. Another boring Queen of Hearts look, I used Princess, Royal Highness, and Ladyship to create a cool toned purpley sort of nude look. All right, look number 20. I used Cheers to the Beauty palette, and I wanted to try a few more colors in this because I was getting sort of to the point of the end of this video, and I was like, I've got to throw in some more colors because there are some cool colors in here that I just haven't used. So I used Razor Glass in the crease. I used Nightingale on the lid. So that's that bronzy sort of old gold color. I used Rosé, which is the really yellow gold shimmer on the inner corner. And I also used Opulence, which is the blue on the lower lash line and I believe the outer corner. Yeah, and that blue worked really, really nicely. It was a beautiful blue. Because I did blend the blue into the bronze, it actually made it look very, very cool toned. So if I didn't actually write down what I was using, I would think that I'm using the shade Iconic, but I actually used the bronze. Look number 21, I used Cheers to the Beauty again. I used Razor Glass, which is that mauve transition color, and I used the shade Iconic. This is that sort of steel gray taupe shade. And I just found that for me, it was way too cool toned. It looked really sort of jarring on my coloring. So I ended up having to go into the Queen of Hearts palette and use Princess and Royal Highness to sort of tone that down a little bit. So I'm not even sure if you can tell, but the outer corner is that Iconic shade, and then I put Royal Highness more on the inner corner because it was just looking too ridiculous. On my lower lash line, I used a light purple mascara, which is why that looks a bit purple. The next look again is a very classic look for me. This is pretty traditional of what I like to use when I'm not reviewing makeup and I just want to go for a brown look and a bright lip. So in this look I used Air, I used Royal Prerogative, Duchess, Dethrone, and Crown. So I used a bit of that highlight shade on the inner corner, but the rest was sort of matte nudes, and I had the deep shimmery brown in the look as well. Look number 23, I used the Beauty Rust palette. I used Dream, Recharge, and Dusk. So this is a very red, orangey, sort of burnt look. So I had to really pack on Dream with my finger to make it look quite shimmery. And I mainly did this look because I hadn't used Dusk yet, and I really love those dark wine matte shades. It was just one that I think these days I'm not really into a lot of warm tone looks, so even though I'm wearing a warm tone look today, but it was one that I really wanted to try, and I sort of forgot that it was in this palette. It's a really, really interesting color, and I sort of wanted to create this look just to use it. All right, look number 24. So this is the second last look. I used Queen of Hearts, I used Air, Royal Prerogative, Your Majesty, Noble Woman, Queen Mother, and Ladyship. So the bit of a difference here was that I used a bit more purple, but I wanted to create more like a sunsetty sort of look. So it sort of went from more of a bronzy gold color through to that sort of wine tone shimmer through to purple. I actually really enjoyed this look. It's a good example of some wearable color that you can get from the Queen of Hearts palette, because I had a lot of like brown looks or bronzy looks or taupey looks, but you can get a bit of color from this palette. Second last look, and I wanted to use the Lovelies palette again, mainly because there is a beautiful dark sort of navy matte blue that I hadn't used. And once again, it's one of those colors that I really like the look of. If it's not, you know, in my face, I just forget to use it. So I created this look to just use this particular shade. So in the Lovelies palette, I used Daydreaming, I used Misty Nights, and I also used Romance. So Romance is that beautiful blue. But I mixed that with the Cheers to the Beauty palette because I found, and I will talk about this a little bit more, but I found the Cheers to the Beauty palette has a lot of cool tone shimmers, but not enough cool tone mattes. So it was really nice to pair those two palettes. And I used the shade Iconic, which is that steel gray. And it actually worked beautifully with the gray from the Lovelies palette. They were like a match made in heaven. And I also used Diamond Jubilee, which is a silver, and it's a really, really beautiful silver. I sort of avoided the silver throughout the whole thing, so I don't really like silver, but this one's a bit of a different one. If you pack it on, it's very, very metallic, but if you actually blend it out, it's more like a topper sparkle. It's really, really beautiful. So it doesn't have that really metallized look to the base. It's just like a sparkle. So I actually found this to be a really beautiful shade. And I'm glad I delved into it because I probably would have ignored it otherwise. And the last look is a look that I'm wearing today. So what I used was the Queen of Hearts palette. I used the Your Majesty and Royal Prerogative. So once again, that's that gold shimmery sort of bronze color all over the lid. And I blended it out with just the matte brown. Then I mixed that with two shades that I had neglected this whole time. One is from the Safari Raine palette, so Tigress, which is this one up here, is a shade that I really loved when I did my review of this. It's just a shade that I haven't been really reaching for recently. So I put that on my lower lash line, sort of in the inner half. And then from the Lovelies palette, I wanted to use Love Love, which is this sort of shimmery red. I put that on the outer corner and a bit on the top. So that's how I use those because they're beautiful shades. They're just not shades at the moment that I've been reaching for. So yeah, I sort of forgot about them, but they apply really nicely. So after using these palettes for about, I don't know, 6 weeks or something on and off, I had a pretty good time with them. I do want to say that my favorite palettes are definitely the larger ones. And I think the order goes, I love this one. This is my most used one. It's not that it's a really exciting palette. It's just very, very usable. I love the brown looks I created. I love the cool tone looks I created using those two and some of the purples. I love the warm looks I created using these sort of shades. I liked adding in these sort of berry shades. I think it was just such a nice palette. And it's one of those palettes that I could use on a daily basis, no problems. There's versatility in the looks, bit of color, bit of warmth, bit of cool tone. You can go smoky, you can do whatever you want, but all the shades really do apply really nicely. They pick up like a dream. They blend beautifully. The quality is really, really nice. Is it my perfect palette? No, there were definitely shades in here that I didn't reach for too often. This shimmer works really nicely. It's sort of one of those, it's like a very white base, but if you apply it quite diffused, it's got almost like a peach iridescence to it. So it's a pretty color. It's just not one that I really reach for too often. But I use this palette a lot. I could definitely see myself using this palette as a primary palette for months because I liked it that much. The next palette that I actually didn't use too much, but I have, like I said, done a review on it, and I really do value this palette. I think the quality is fantastic, and there's a little bit more color in it that I really vibe with. So the Safari Raine palette, once again, the quality is beautiful. I didn't actually reach for this too many times in the last month because I haven't been going for like wildly colorful looks, but these are nice wearable color looks. If you want to get a similar effect to a couple of the greens in the Gemini palette, these two are great. The teal is beautiful. This bottom row, sort of cool toned, it's really, really pretty, warm toned up here. So even though I do love the quality of this, it's not one that I reach for on a daily basis, but I think it's a really, really great quality palette, and it pairs really, really nicely with this one. Often I would want to use a shimmer from this, but blend it out with mattes from this. So I thought they were really great. In terms of quality, I really do like the Cheers to the Beauty palette. I just found the colors were a little bit hard to wear on a daily basis. When I did try to use this in like a nude look, it just looked a bit funny. So I think the biggest issue with this is not the quality. The quality is beautiful. I don't really get this big topper shade. It's got an iridescent, once again, it's sort of like a peachy color, similar to the one from the Queen of Hearts. It's just a little bit less white, I think. So it's not as white, it's a little bit more peachy. I don't know. I think I used that once. I really didn't need it. It was average. But so let's ignore that for now. So the quality is very, very nice. I just think the balance of colors are a little bit hard to use on a daily basis. And a lot of them are very, very cool toned and very frosty. They're not really my colors that I vibe with. So even though I really do like this palette and I do like reaching for it in combination with other palettes, it wasn't one that I was sort of comfortable using on a daily basis. I mainly just reach for this one and some of these kind of shades. Another issue that I had with this, and I think this is probably the biggest issue that I had with it, was that if you look at the shimmers, so the shimmers there, a lot of them lean very, very cool toned, but you really don't have many cool tone shades to really blend them out and do them justice. So for example, I didn't even really like this shade here because it looks sort of, I don't know, it looks sort of taupe and sort of cool tone wearable, but it ends up looking very, very sort of stark and metallic on the lid, and I didn't have much to blend it out with. When I found this shade here from the Lovelies palette, I realized they work so well together that they should have been in the same palette. Like, I don't understand. So you can see if you actually paired those two, you create a really beautiful sort of modern, smoky, browny gray color look, which was actually surprisingly nice. But I only discovered that combination like 3 days ago. So I just think that the individual shades in here are beautiful, but you really do need to reach for other palettes to make the most of it because they don't pair super well together. So that was my issue with this palette, but the quality is very, very nice. When it came to these little palettes, I didn't use them too often, and I also found most of them quite difficult to create a cohesive look just using the one palette. So at the start, I sort of tried, and then I just got into the routine of pairing it with the Queen of Hearts or pairing it with the Cheers to the Beauty to make something like that is such a good combo. Now that I know about that, I'm going to reach for both palettes to create that, but you have to sort of have them all and have them open and be like, wait, they work really well together. What the fuck? Whereas otherwise you don't know. So these, I think, I didn't like them individually. The only look that I really liked that I created individually was when I was using the Smoke Show, and I used that sort of like smoky, I don't know, nude lid and like deep crease sort of look. But I also found that a lot of these shades were dupable in the bigger palettes. So I didn't use the shimmery black because it's not a color I like to use, but a basic dark brown, a warm brown, or the nudes, I could dupe in the bigger palettes. So even though sometimes I was like, I'll use a Smoke Show, and I'm like, why? When I can just use, you know, Queen of Hearts and get the same thing. Yeah, I just found this so much easier to reach for than this. The only thing I really valued from this was this shade here, and I think that paired well with the Safari Rain palette, but for me, this was a little bit redundant. So I knowing what I know now, I probably wouldn't have purchased this. Very cute. I didn't like the color combinations it created. And one issue that I have with this palette and another palette, and maybe two other palettes, is I find the shimmers in some of these palettes are very, very flaky and don't stick to the eye. So this one was, you think that that's a nice sort of like rose gold color. You're like, oh, it looks like Huda Beauty, sort of that angel color. But for some reason, it's sort of chunky and it just doesn't stick to the eye very well. It's very, very delicate in the pan, and it just isn't great. So once again, I sort of wish these shades were maybe in a bigger palette so you can reach for some of those cooler tone transition colors to smoke out some of the shimmers that we've got in like the Cheers to the Beauty palette. But the rest of them, they didn't do it for me. This wasn't that special. I like the purples more in the Queen of Hearts. So this was just like, okay, I have to use it, but I just didn't like the outcome. But this dark plum is gorgeous. This should have been in like the Cheers to the Beauty palette. I just feel like these palettes, they have like one standout shade each. that I sort of want to like depot and put in like a bigger palette so I can use them and then discard the other shades that don't really do much. Beauty Rust was sort of the same. The shimmer shade in here is not good. It looks really interesting, but it just is very, very flaky, very chunky, and doesn't adhere to the eye very well. It's a real shame. When it comes to, once again, these sort of colors, they're just warm sort of transition-y brown mattes that you can find in a lot of the other palettes. The two standout shades, in my opinion, is definitely Dusk, which is a beautiful dark matte wine, and also Daisy, which is that mustard color. So these two, once again, if I had to depot them, I would take these two shades, discard the other ones, because they do add something different to the palettes. So they're here. They're very, very beautiful, and I will keep the palette for them. They would pair really nicely with something like the Safari Rain palette, but just as its own little capsule palette, I don't really like it. And then the last one is the Lovelies palette. This again, I think this shade isn't as flaky and horrible as the last two shades that I mentioned, but it's just not that fantastic. It's like a shimmery, frosty pink, which doesn't really do it for me. So I didn't love this, but I think the standout shades from this palette are the bottom row. This grey, which I've got on my hand there, is very, very modern, very complex. It's a beautiful grey. I wish I sort of utilized it more earlier because I think this could create really beautiful cool tone smoky looks. This dark navy is gorgeous as well. Beautiful. Like the pigmentation is crazy, and it would pair really, really beautiful with these two blues. Mind you, I used this blue in a look. It is such a glorious blue. It is really, really nice. So if you did want to pair it with something, this is like a gorgeous combination. And I'm just surprised that you have to reach for two palettes to get that, because I feel like the navy and the grey would benefit so much from being in this particular palette. It was just like a missed opportunity. And the last shade I do quite like is Love Love, which I've just got here, and I've got on my sort of outer corner. It's just a nice metallic red. It's a really, really beautiful shade there. Once again, it's one of those shades that I sort of forgot about until I was sort of taking inventory and being like, what do I want to use before I finish this? And I was like, wow, that's a beautiful color that I just forgot about because it's sort of hidden in a palette that doesn't really inspire me. So yeah, these shades, so the grey and those shades down there, I think they're the standouts from these mini palettes, but I don't recommend buying the 4 mini palettes just to get one or two shades from each of them that are really unique and beautiful and add a lot to the larger palettes. It just seems a little bit unnecessary. So I sort of wish that the larger palettes maybe had an extra row and they did slot in some of these beautiful shades that would really complement the other shades in the palette and just make a lot more sense. And utilize some probably ignored shades from the smaller palettes. So overall, I think like the biggest pro to the Coloured Raine eyeshadow sort of range is the quality. I think the quality is beautiful, and I think the quality is best in the larger palettes. If you want something that you can use all the time, the Queen of Hearts is such a good palette. And then you can choose, like I think this is being discontinued, but you can sort of inject a bit of color with some of these other sort of supporting palettes, and the quality is gorgeous. You get really, really metallic foiled shimmers, you get really pigmented but blendable, beautiful mattes, and yeah, I just found the quality so easy to work with. But I think my lowest point were definitely the smaller palettes. I think if you've got the bigger palettes, a lot of the shades in here are quite redundant. And I also found some of the shimmer formula in this was so flaky and just didn't really adhere to the eyes. Whereas I think in the other palettes, they almost have like a creamy consistency that just sort of, you know, grips to the eye and creates this beautiful shimmery foiled look. Whereas these ended up looking a bit flaky. They didn't want to stick to the eye. They were sad. I didn't like them. And I did find that each palette had sort of its hero color or couple of colors, these guys, that I am going to keep the palettes for, but I do definitely think that they will be heavily ignored and underutilized because they weren't put alongside some of the bigger palettes. Another negative I found was the balance of colors in this one just didn't really work. If it had like a gray from the Lovelies and some cooler tone shades in this to make the cooler tone shimmers work, I think this would be a much more sort of usable palette. But as it is, you sort of have to go with sort of bold metallics and mix them with warm sort of transition colors, and it's not really something that inspires me, but the quality is very nice. So yeah, this video has sort of left me wanting to depot all these eyeshadows and rearrange them in a big palette. I won't do that because whenever I do that, I don't actually use the large palettes. But yeah, I just feel like that's a great way to visually see how like the mustard would work so well with the Safari Rain, and the shimmery red and the dark beautiful wine color. The plum color and the wine color would go so well in the Queen of Hearts palette, and how that gray and that navy blue would go so well in the Cheers to the Beauty palette. Like, I really feel like I wish I could just take a few out of the smaller ones and just slot them into the bigger ones and just make the epic palettes, but unfortunately, I can't do that, so I'm not going to do that. But yeah, overall, I did enjoy my time using these palettes because I do really like the formula. It's one of the eyeshadow formulas that I do recommend to people because I think you get pretty good bang for your buck because the quality is very usable, but generally gives a really beautiful effect on the eye. So yeah, I really like the range, and I'm always curious about what they're bringing out next. For the people that are asking, I haven't picked up the Power palette. Unfortunately, that is, I think it's exclusive to their website, and I think the palette and shipping to Australia ends up being like the same price. So it's like I'm buying 2 palettes just to get it here. Whereas I prefer to buy my Coloured Raine off more local websites or websites that have better international shipping. So I will link a few places that you can buy Coloured Raine. I'll link their website, Glam Raider, which is an Australian stockist. They don't have everything, but they have quite a few things, and a few other places as well. So I do recommend having a look what works out to be better value for you if you're interested in them, because they're not super expensive eyeshadow palettes on their own, and you can buy them on sale, but shipping may change how expensive they are depending on where you get them from. Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed that. That would be my last 1 month sort of video or 6-week video for a little while. I will start switching to the 1 week 1 palette, and I'm going to start with actually a 1 week 3 palettes. It might end up being longer than a week, but it is what it is. I really want to do a review including 3 sort of get ready with me style try on videos of the new Huda Nude palettes, because I got all 3 because they're beautiful. So I sort of want to start using those next week and maybe carry into the following week, and let you know the looks I create using those 3 palettes. So anyway, guys, hopefully you enjoyed that, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.